Oh my God, fire the accountants. This one's blank. So,
It's blank.
it's blank.
Wait a minute.
Fire the accountants.
Let me see this. Wait a minute. You say it's blank. Vince, you guitar players, you're all calluses, I'm telling you. The top female vocalist of the year is Reba McEntire.
I think country music has got some of the best people in it that I've ever been in contact in my life. And now that I have this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for all the love and the support, I want you to know it means the world to me. Thanks to the Academy, to everybody at MCA Records, to all my family, musical and blood. This is for my 8 buddies. Thank you. I know they're grinning up there knowing that they've had so many friends on earth. And again, thank you very much for all your love and support. Thank you. They split up and went on 2 Saberliners into San Diego. Well, they were there and ready for the show by the time Narvel and Sandy and I got there. And so we went to the hotel where the show was going to be held. And I got ready, did the show, and I did Sweet Dreams that night as my encore. The band left the stage, and I did Sweet Dreams. And so we went back to the hotel, and Jim Hammond, my tour manager, came up to the suites with us, with me and Narvel. And we were talking about, I wanted to show Jim the suite because it was a really nice room that IBM had rented us for us that night. And it had a huge, swanky bathroom and real nice living room. And I was showing Jim around because, man, we were just like, you know, kids from home. We were tickled to death about this. And so then Narvel, we were coming back the next week back to San Diego. And Narvel said, why don't we have everybody up here in the suite after the show next week, and we'll have hors d'oeuvres and some drinks, and we'll just have a get-together. And Jim said, I'll have it arranged. And so I hugged Jim's neck, and he went on down and loaded up everybody in the vans, and they went to the airport. So we went to bed, and Narvel was watching television still. He's a CNN fanatic, and I was asleep, and the phone rang, and it was our pilot, Roger Woolsey, and he said, Narvel, can you come up here to my room? I think something terrible has happened. Well, what had happened was Wayne, Roger's brother, who was our co-pilot, went on one of the planes. Jim had talked to Narvel about, Jim Hammond had talked to Narvel about taking the Hawker that we had flown in on because it was a bigger plane than the Saberliner that we had usually been flying on. He said, can we swap you planes? And that way we'll have more room. And Narvel said, sure. You know, it's just Sandy and Reba and myself. We won't need that much room. So we were going to take the Saberliner back that next day. And so Roger was going to fly us. And so Roger went out with everybody to the other field. I'll have to back up one more time. Once Jim got us at the airport, when we first flew in, he told us that there is a curfew where we flew in. And the band wouldn't be able to make it back to the airport to fly out before the curfew. The airport would be closed down. So Narvel said, well, instead of having to rush the show and rush everybody getting back over here, let's have the pilots move the planes up to the other airfield that does not have a curfew. And so they did that, and so our pilot, Roger, went out with everybody else to the other airport, and they got on their planes, and Roger was leaving the airport, and for some reason he looked in his rearview mirror and saw a huge ball of fire, an explosion. One plane took off safely, and one took off and hit the side of the mountain.
I want to point out something here and commend Narvel. Narvel had the tough job of talking to the families. And that probably was one of the hardest jobs he's ever had in his entire life.
Without a doubt. But it kept him from breaking down. I already had. I was going from room to room. We had 2 rooms and a living room in the middle. Norval and I were sleeping in here, and this bedroom was vacant. And he had to go in the other room to make phone calls because I was falling behind him crying. And he finally had to tell me, he said, Reba, you're going to have to leave me alone. I can't do this with you crying. And so he called everybody. He called his mom and dad, but he forgot to call his children in Wyoming. And I called my parents, and I also called Barbara Mandrell, because Barbara, Kurt Capello had worked for her before he came to work for me, and I thought she should know.
Reba, why did you write this book?
To set the record straight on a lot of things that had been written about me. There are 2 other unauthorized biographies on me, and I flipped through them. The pictures were okay. I've seen them before, and basically they're newspaper articles and things they've gotten from the press. And I thought it was only fair to I've been through it. If I hadn't been through it, I couldn't say that. But to keep busy was my only way of keeping my sanity. And I knew I had an organization to think of too. They had families to feed. Their way of making a living and feeding their family was to be on the road. And if I didn't sing and perform, they didn't have a job. They'd have to go find a job with somebody else, and that takes time. And they weren't in any shape to go looking for another job. We were a wreck. We were emotionally wrecked.
How did you find the strength to sing at the Oscar Awards?
Well, when we got home Saturday night from San Diego, we went and visited the families, and the next day we did. But before we left for the next day, on Sunday, I was at my dressing room table, my vanity, putting on my makeup, getting ready to go see the families. And I thought to myself, man, we got to tell the people at the Oscars. Because we discussed when we were going to go back on the road, and I said maybe July. This was March. And so then I was thinking, man, the Oscars, I told them I'd sing. And I told them I'd sing I'm Checking Out. That's the song they picked from the song from the Postcards from the Edge. And I started, in my mind, going over the words of that song. And I thought, man, that's my band. They're checking out of this old heartbreak hotel, which is the earth. They've gone on to a better place. They're happy. And I had a very peaceful, just like no problems, no worry, no sorrow. And it was just like they said to me, go sing that for us. And I walked into the sitting room. Narvel was watching television. I said, Narvel, I'm going to do the Oscars. He said, what? I said, yeah, I'm supposed to. I know I am. And he called them the next day, called Sandy Brokaw, my publicist out on the West Coast. And Sandy called the people at the Oscars, and he said, they never took your name off the list.
Your faith in God gave you a great deal of strength, didn't it?
I couldn't have done it without him.
How about the People magazine article?
We picked the People magazine article because Jane Sanderson is a very good friend of mine. I love her to pieces, and I know she respects my privacy. She respects my feelings, and I knew that she would do the best and say what I said and to the best of her ability.
Write an article with some class to it.
Mm-hmm. She's very, very good. Well, it was in 1991, March of 91, and we were playing a private show in San Diego, California. And after the show, we had 2 hawkers that were out at the airport, the FBO, and it was Brown Field in San Diego. That was the airport. And Narvel and Sandy Spica, who was my stylist, who did my hair and my clothes, Narvel and Sandy and I were going to stay all night there in San Diego and fly the next morning or the next day to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to our concert the next night. And so the other two Hawkers, airplanes, were at Brown Field, and my band and part of my crew, the rest of the crew was already in Indiana, were going to split up in these two planes and fly to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so one of them took off, and when the other one took off, the tip of the wing of the airplane hit a rock on the side of Otay Mountain. And it killed everyone on the plane. And when we were notified, Narvel went and had met with our pilot, and he told us what had happened, and Narvel came back to the hotel room where I was, and he said, it was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and he said, one of the planes have crashed. And I said, are they okay? He said, I don't think so. I said, but you're not sure? He said, I don't think so. So in my mind, any minute now, we're gonna get a call. They're all right. Well, that call never came. And so it was the rest of the night, Narvel was going room to room with the phone and calling. I'm sorry. It's been 20 years. It's just like, I don't guess it ever quits hurting. But I can see that room. I can see Narvel walking back and forth, and I'm trailing him, bawling. And he turns to me and says, Reba, you got to go in the other room. I've got to call these people. Because he had to let them know before it got out on the news. He didn't want them to find out from the newscast. And so I went in the other room and I called Barbara Mandrill because I had taken Kirk Capello, my musical director. I had gotten him from her. She was very close to Kirk, and I wanted her to know from me that he had died in the plane crash. So it was the worst thing that's ever happened in my life. But I just can't imagine Jim's family, Kirk's family, Joey, Paula Case, all the band that we lost, the pilots, their family. I lost friends. They lost family members. Very talented, fun people to be around. And it was one of those situations where Narvel said, you know, we've got the rest of the tour. And I was like, are you kidding? I really thought it was over. I didn't know how on earth the rest of the band, Pete Finney and Joe McGlohan and myself, could get back on stage without the rest of them. And I got calls from Vince Gill. He said, buddy, I'll be on stage with you. I'll help you. Dolly Parton should take my band. It was a huge outpour of friends in the community, family, that were there for us. But nobody could replace the ones that we loved so much that we lost. And that's one of the questions I'll ask God when I get up there. Why'd you take them so quick? They had so much more to give. And we had so much more to learn from them. But we learned from that situation. And the biggest thing that I learned is, don't go a day without telling people you love them. And do act like this day could be your last one. So do what you want to do in the fact of hanging out with your family. Do things that are important. Don't put it off till tomorrow.